This is a governor who, once he was elected, in a disputed election, I might add, but once he was elected, is the governor of all the people, except it's not that way anymore. If you have the unmitigated gall of exercising your First Amendment rights to offer a differing opinion than the governor's, you're a member of the extreme right wing. Suddenly he doesn't represent you, I guess. If you're a member of the, God forbid, Tea Party, this governor doesn't represent you. But boy, oh boy, if you want to circumvent the Constitution, if you want to be on the governor's side, then he'll stand by you every step of the way, regardless of how much you may be in violation of that Constitution. That is wrong. He is the governor. Once he's elected, he is the governor of all the people. And instead, he's out there campaigning for one side instead of doing his job. I saw it again the other day with the lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governor, along with the governor, should be worrying about creating jobs in Connecticut. Instead, they are out there campaigning during the day, during their workday, for one side. Again, I thought they represented all the people once they were elected. So we've got big issues in this state, and we have big issues in this country. And this is why we, the people, is a very important lobby. It's a very important because we need to engage people on the political process. We need to engage them from grade school up. We should be teaching the Constitution in our schools. They should know about the separation of powers. When you walk on the street and you ask people who the Vice President of the United States is, and they don't know, although in this case that might be a good thing, but they don't know, something is wrong. We need to be spending more time learning about our country, understanding what the Constitution is all about, rather than worrying who is going to be on the next episode of Dancing with the Stars or pick your particular television program. So, and the reason we do is our country is at stake. I'm not so sure people understand how close we are to going over the cliff. We are on the abyss. We're talking about another quantitative easing that's going to spend more money we do not have. The Founding Fathers never had this in mind when they created our country. Never had it in mind for us to be spending money we don't have. We're doing it in Connecticut, and we are doing it on the federal level. Don't get me going about Connecticut and our state budget. State constitution says the budget is supposed to be in balance. In other words, we are supposed to only spend as much money as is coming in. We are using every trick in the book to get around that. Essentially, we as a state operate as a deficit. But again, they are playing gimmicks with the Constitution to make it look as if we're going to have a balanced budget. Let me give you the greatest illustration of all. State income tax, right? Here in Connecticut. How many people remember the state income tax fund? And here was the deal. We're going to be very responsible as lawmakers. You give us the state income tax, which is, passed by one vote, thanks to Eunice Groark, the lieutenant governor who broke the tie. But you give us the state income tax, and we are going to be responsible. We will institute a constitutionally mandated state spending cap, whereby state spending can never increase more than 2.5% in one budget. That was the deal. Well, once they got that state income tax, which was a license to spend, the spending went up. And it went up beyond 2.5% a year. What did they do? Well, the people of Connecticut, the voters of Connecticut, they're really not that intelligent about the minutia of government, the day-to-day managing of government. We really need this money in order to operate our programs. Not a problem. This office here, we'll just remove it from counting as part of the state spending cap, so we can increase spending here. This line item here, we'll remove it from the state spending cap so that when we calculate that state spending cap, that won't figure in the calculation. So what do we have here? we have a situation where they have exempted so many items in the budget from the so-called state spending cap that when it comes time to pass the budget, voila, we managed to come up with a balanced budget, and we did it without increasing spending by 2.5%. Of course, they don't tell you they've exempted numerous budgetary items from that state spending cap. That is wrong. It is a violation of the state constitution. Again, one of the many, many for instances. One other example, and it's a big issue during this campaign, and I know the Democrats had a big news conference at the state legislature the other day about this. All the money that's being spent on the campaign. Citizens United, how could the Supreme Court have ruled against that? We have to get all of this money out of politics, they say. Here's what they didn't say. 2 years ago, remember? I think it was 2 years, maybe it was 4 years. 4 years ago, 2008. By the state constitution, the people of Connecticut were supposed to vote when they went to the ballot box in November on calling for a state constitution. In the Connecticut Constitution, every 20 years, people have the right to vote on creating a constitutional convention whereby a body of people, including us, sit on a board and come up with ways to amend the state constitution. As you know, in Connecticut, we don't have the right of referendum. Massachusetts, of all states, has the right of referendum. California has the right of referendum. Proposition this, proposition that. Whether you agree or don't agree, I happen to like a proposition-style government because it gets the people more involved. Government by referendum. In Connecticut, there was a group of people led by a Democrat and a former state representative, John Woodcock, a professor of political science at Central Connecticut State University. He'd had enough. He'd had enough with the Democrats. He had enough with the Republicans because he witnessed all the shenanigans that were taking place in Hartford. And he saw that they were circumventing the Constitution. So he said, what we need to do is make sure that when they go to the voters in November of 2008 and ask whether a constitutional convention should be called by the legislature, that it passes. Then Attorney General Richard Blumenthal, then Secretary of the State Susan Beisowitz, did their best to stop that question from being put on the ballot in 2008. But they couldn't. Even Chairman Blumenthal and Chairman Beisowitz, although they tried, couldn't stop that question from being placed on the ballot. But now the money comes into play. The unions didn't want this. The unions didn't want the people to decide if the referendum question was ever placed before the voters on binding arbitration. Union didn't want that. The state representatives, many of whom were members of the Democrat Party, the state senators, they didn't want to have people have a say in government whereby they could vote themselves at the ballot box on these issues, which the Democrats have had a stranglehold for years. They didn't want that. So they all got together and they outspent the people who promoted this effort to get a constitutional convention. They outspent them in Connecticut by $1 million to $15,000. $1 million to $15,000. Suddenly, there was nothing wrong with using that money for their side. Nothing wrong with that at all. And still, it almost passed. The forces who spent just $15,000 almost had that amendment, almost had that question passed so that we would have had a constitutional convention. Now we have to wait. It's been 4 years. We have to wait another 16 years before the people have the chance to decide on whether to have a constitutional convention. The only way we could amend the Constitution of Connecticut right now is if it comes by way of the state legislature. The people would have to descend on the General Assembly en masse in order to demand a a constitutional convention so that we could amend the Constitution, and amend the Constitution so that it would include a referendum. Otherwise, we've got to wait 16 years. And it was these forces who do not want people involved, who worked hard in order to reject the opportunity for us to have a constitutional convention in Connecticut so that we could amend the Constitution. That's wrong. That's not what this country is all about. And you know what? We need to expand who we have here today by, like, John, would you say 1 million? That's what we need, 1 million. Because we're losing our state, we are losing our country, and there are forces out there who are doing everything possible to create one more government program after another in violation of this tremendous rule book to make as many people as dependent as possible on the government so that they will hold on to power. That is wrong. That's not our country. Our founding fathers never envisioned this. And that's why we need to get back to the Constitution. That is why what Deb and Estelle and all of you here today, what you are doing, the endeavor in which you are engaged is worth the cause. What's at stake? Our country, our state. That's where we are. And we need more people to get involved. Questions? Who has questions?
How can we help you get on the air again?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All I can tell you, let me give you a plug, first of all, for my 3 websites, which I have: cttalking.com, danlovallo.com,